Welcome to the Imagination Factory. I'm Sarah,
I'm Keith.
and today we are going to be continuing on with our Lizard Western, our showdown in the desert between our bearded dragon and our, what did we decide it was? What did we
Oh,
decide?
it's a frilled dragon.
That's it, the frilled lizard that stands on his legs and runs. So we have them having a showdown in an old Western town.
We have um almost an immediate, like, we're jumped right into the middle of the action where we have these two dragon creatures standing off. It could be that our Leonard and Pip are like the good guys in this, but that may not necessarily even be the case if um as you can see here, we decided to make it so that um both uh Pip and Fernando we're kind of just like they're just being obnoxious, right? It could always be something where Leonard scolds Pip, right?
Yeah,
Like,
because we had the story kind of being that, as these 2 dragons are showing off their we have showing off the beard and showing off the frills and whatever, and then it's like, Pip's had enough. And then Leonard just goes around and bites bites the tail, sends him scurrying. He takes action into his own hands. He's a little grasshopper, but he means business. He's not just gonna stand by and let these 2, dictate what's happening to him.
yeah, exactly. Like, it's a you know it could be a scenario where um for all we know, this happens in every town, right? Like,
Yeah.
for all we
They
know
show
that,
up and cause trouble. Yeah.
yeah, that this is like Pip's whole like modus operandi. He's just grouchy, right? Like, for
Yeah.
whatever reason, and gets into spars with whoever looks at them sideways, right? So we just don't know exactly the reason why Fernando is doing what Fernando's doing. Uh, I always like to imagine, like, what well, just to, like, back up a little bit,
Mhm.
just as a life thing, we make assumptions about people because we're coming in the middle of their stories often, right?
Mhm.
You're somebody's reacting to something and they're yelling, and you walk in and you're like, oh my God, this person is unhinged. And if you had seen what happened 5 minutes prior, you would have seen that somebody, like, did something to him that instigated it, possibly, right? Or, if you leave thinking, oh my God, this person's dangerous, and then 2 minutes later the person goes, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I lost it, I just had my mother passed, or something
Yeah.
like that, right? So and that's one of the things about storytelling, is like, you don't have to start at the beginning. You start in the middle, and this the characters that you're are inhabiting this world, the characters you've created, they nowadays they're more complicated than good guys and bad guys, right? They're shades of gray. So we want to give that to everybody that we now inhabit in these worlds, is like, well, this person, this character may have had something really bad happen to them just before we see them, and now that's why they're reacting the way they are, but we don't know that, and so the audience is kind of going, "Oh my God, what's wrong with this person?" Right?
100%. And it's interesting too because, we have Leonard and Pip and their little tag team, and they kinda come in together and you're like, "Oh, he's got the cute little grasshopper on his back, he must be the good guy." And Fernando kinda he looks a little cranky, right? Like, right from the first frame, he's kinda got a little attitude, and then he hisses and throws his hat off as his frills come out. But like you said, we don't know why he's angry. Like, maybe he was, trying to run his little shop and Leonard and Pip came in and made a mess or stole something or whatever. We don't know who's actually in the right in this. We just came up right in the middle of a fight and picked a side. Not necessarily the right side. And maybe there isn't a right side. They could just be having an argument in the street that neither one of them is in the right. They just decided to fight.
Yeah. I mean, one scenario could also be that, like, Pip and Leonard are like bank robbers,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Like,
Old West, anything could happen.
right? And even that would be like they're bank robbers, but they're doing it because they're like the place they're from, they have to pay back the bad guy that, is has taken their family hostage, right? We like
Yeah.
there's
It could
just
be
like
Robin
layers.
Hood-esque, right? Like they're they're robbing from the bank to help the little grasshoppers down the road that have no food. Like
That's right.
there's
That's right. Like,
yeah, that's kind of what we, as we were starting to kind of go into this, and like we said, we had 3 different sort of styles of how this page could look, and the whole idea of Leonard sneaking back and biting the tail was just it was really kind of a funny way to escalate things, right? As opposed to just these 2 dragons posturing to each other. It's like the little guy takes matters into his own hands, is like, "I'm gonna end this fight right now." And again, we don't know if he was in the right or the wrong, but he got things done and he, gave us a fun little beat of action to kind of give us a resolution. Otherwise, where does it go? Right? We wanted to have some kind of an ending to the page, and that tail bite gave us a reason for him to be yipping off into the distance.
yeah. So one of the things that I do when I do shows is I do like workshops, single panel stories that I'll like teach people how to create within like a 2 hour period, kind of essentially what we're doing here. Um, and it's a really good exercise because if you can tell a story in a single page, then you can do a 5-page story and a 10-page and, anthology, a short ash can to a comic book to like a mini series to a graphic novel, right? So you can if you can do that, then you're going to be able to do longer form. And so one of the things about um some of the students that I have that are just like, how do I do this? It could be overwhelming because you think about it as like, oh, it's got to be this complex story. But in reality, it doesn't have to be. It's got to have the beginning, middle, and end. It's got to have the conflict and the resolution. You want to have you want to have a couple kinds of characters in there, a hero, an anti-hero, a sidekick, or whatever it is, like a mentor, like those kinds of characters. And then maybe some kind of like a genre that you can, focus on, right? A setting that you can focus on. That's kind of the recipe for this like single page story we're doing. And I find that like some people take it on very quickly. They're like, oh, it doesn't have to be super complicated. This person walks in, this is the problem, they figure it out, and then that's it, right? And where other people want it to be super complicated and it stumps them. And I think like I always just go with like you know, there's nothing wrong with making it like really kind of simple, right? And in this scenario, it's pretty, we're coming in the middle of the action. We don't know, like, we know that the conflict is, like they don't like, these 2 lizards don't like each other, right? Um, but like, we don't, it's always fun to kind of imagine what could have happened before, what could happen after, but this stands by itself too, right?
Absolutely. And I think something that's important as well is as the creator, as the artist, as the writer, you have to decide how many of those questions you want to or need to answer and how many can be left up to the audience to interpret, right? Like we could make it very obvious with, some dialogue or a little like, backstory or something like that, what happened before, or we can make the choice of being like, hey reader, it's up to you. Which side are you going to take? Right? As if you
Oh,
walked up to these 2 battling and you have to decide who you think is the good guy or bad guy. And there really isn't a right or wrong answer. That's something as a creator you have to decide is how much it matters to you how people interpret it. Or if you like the idea of leaving it open and kind of letting people read however they want to into it and leaving it into be that kind of story. Because both things work and both things are viable. You just have to make that choice and be okay with how people interpret it then.
yeah. That's right. But that's the also fun part is having the audience be part of the story, right?
Hmm.
Like part of the longer I do this, the more I realize that I like audience participation more than kind of like explaining everything to them, like
Hmm.
having them. interpret it in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of. Like you obviously want it's a balance of you're creating a world, you don't want them to ever want to leave it, but also if you make it, if you spell everything out for them, it may that may also detract, that they may be like, I didn't need to know all
Yeah,
this
you don't
stuff.
have to
Why?
spoon feed me all that
Yeah,
information. Yeah. No, it's so true, and depending on who your audience is, the point of your story, what you're trying to do with it also kind of determines how much you need to tell people or how much you want to tell them. You want the story to be able to speak for itself, but to that point as well, how people interpret it, it's fun when there's a little bit of room for interpretation because then 2 different people read the same thing or look at the same thing, and one of them is like, "Oh, Leonard and Pip were definitely the bad guys." And the other one's like, "What are you
yeah,
talking about? That frilled lizard with that hat, he totally Fernando was the instigator." And you it's kind of fun when you can let people see it from whatever seat in the room they think is the most appropriate.
yeah. Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, and I could also do that visually too. Like I can
Absolutely.
make it so that um like the way I'm maybe I don't finish a line, like I let the reader fill the line in, or
Mhm.
maybe I don't make the character, if they're in the background, they're not super detailed, so the reader gets to like fill in, the little details that you can't quite see, but they kind of know, what it is that they're looking at, right? Those are all kind of fun things to do as the artist, uh, so let me ask you this, for the writer, what are things you do to help the, audience fill in the blanks, right?
Well, I think it depends again on the kind of story that you're creating, right? If you're writing something that is purely words, or you're writing something that is going to be matched with visuals, because those are kind of different tactics. Like I always love a good Easter egg, right? Like I always love something where the longer you look at it, the more you notice in it, and you might notice things that somebody else didn't notice. And I like to plant those in, right? So it's like little things of saying to the illustrator, "Can you make sure that when you're creating this, that we hide um, different characters in these places?" Like as an example, my first novel, a children's novel called The Purple Raccoon. And the whole idea behind it is that there are colorful animals that can speak and do all these things, and they're hidden in our world. And you don't know they're there unless they choose to find you. And when I had the artist doing the cover, I asked them to hide colorful animals all around it that you wouldn't necessarily notice until you looked again and again. And I loved that idea that, if you pick it up, you're like, oh, purple raccoon, right front and center. But the longer you look at the cover, the more you start seeing, a pink squirrel and a blue frog like hiding in the background. So using visuals through like, as a writer, I love to use the visuals to do that for me. When we're talking purely words, sometimes it is making a comment that seems offhanded in the moment, but later
Mhm.
on becomes important, right? When you read something, you're like, wait a second. And you flip back and you're like, they did mention something about this that wasn't relevant at the time, but later on came up. I do love those kinds of things and weaving them into a story so that you put it in there, but no one's going to notice it until it becomes relevant much later.
Right, yeah, so you're planting a seed for
Mhm.
some of the plot, but, um,
And if you
you're
don't notice it and you don't pick it up, that's okay, right? Like you're not missing anything. But for people that were like, whoa, I remember somebody mentioning that, there was a magic wishing well way earlier, but it seemed irrelevant at the moment. And then suddenly it came up later. I like to plant that stuff in that if you notice it, amazing. And if you miss it, that's okay. You can still enjoy without catching all those things that were kind of hidden in there.
right, right. Um, Trying to think of, like, there be examples of, like, a dialogue where
Mhm.
somebody's insinuating something and they're not necessarily, it's kind of like a wink and a nod, but the audience has to kind of fill in the blank there going, "Oh, are they talking? I think they're talking about this. Ooh, okay, that's interesting." Like, is that
Exactly.
do you do anything like that as well? Like where you're, uh
Yes, absolutely. I love to do that kind of thing where the audience is like, "Hold on a second. I remember seeing that somewhere, hearing about that somewhere, or did they mean this or did they mean that? And leaving it open to interpretation. So there is something to be said for not putting everything right on the nose and leaving some room for you to either read it as straight up dialogue or for you to kind of read what's underneath it and be like, hold on a second. I wonder if they're talking about this thing and leave it as a question without being answered. I think
Mhm.
sometimes as creators, we have to make sure we give our audience enough credit, right? It can be really easy to be like, but did I explain that enough? Let me put in some more words and make sure that everybody really gets it. And sometimes you have to take a step back and be like, no, you know what? I'm going to let it hang. And if people get it, great. And if they don't, that's okay too. Because you want to also reward your audience for paying attention, right? You don't want to over explain it to the point they're like, yes, we get it. It's magical. Stop reminding us, right? Like you want to
Right.
just put enough in that it's there, but not so much that the audience feels like you don't trust them to get what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just recently read a book where like the reveal at the end of it, you kind of go, oh, now I kind of maybe figure this out, but like all the little hints and stuff didn't detract from the story. Like it's still like knowing the ending now didn't necessarily where I'm like, oh, I could have totally figured this out if I really wanted to, but it didn't change the just how good the story was for me, right? Like
Yeah,
it was
which
kind of
is great.
almost like it made it cool that that's how it ended, where you're like, oh, that character ended up there. It was essentially, without getting into specifics, it was essentially talking about the history or the imagined potential alternate history of a very well known, uh, famous person,
Hmm,
and but they weren't actually describing, they weren't like naming that who that person was. It was just like they were just kind of like this person John did all these things and then and but that even that person wasn't like the main character. There was another person that was the main character.
mm,
So the person, this very, very famous person that is revealed at the end was kind of like a MacGuffin, like kind of getting this story rolling, but
yeah,
they weren't like necessarily like involved in that person's like the through line of the story per se. So
right.
anyway, that was like kind of a really I thought that was kind of an interesting way to do something, right? Like, you know, if they didn't make that reveal at the end, I don't know if it would have altered the story that greatly, and
Mhm.
it just kind of put, like, an exclamation point on it, right?
Yeah, which is kinda
So
cool, right? It's something where it's like, wow, like, now with that in my mind and I rethink the story back again, I have
mhm,
a kinda different way of visualizing it, which is really interesting. I read a lot of murder mysteries. That's one of the genres I enjoy writing in, and big part of that is obviously specifically planting things in there subtly, right? So making sure that there's the clues are there. I hate a plot hole. I hate plot holes. I hate when you are like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. There's no way they could have done this. So I'm very specific of making sure that everything is there, but it's subtly there. So that if you were to go back and look, you'd be like, oh, yes, that is right. That person did have access to that alone when nobody else was in the room. But I didn't notice that at the time because it didn't seem important. So I think that's always the art of making sure that you've tied up enough loose ends that it makes sense, but not so many that all of a sudden person's like, well, clearly this person's the one that did it because you kept leaving them alone in the room with the stuff. So there's always this kind of fine line between, making sure you leave enough breadcrumbs without putting the whole loaf down.
yeah. Well, that's as I said, sometimes, I mean, this is talking also about, like, staging something, right?
Mhm.
Staging something in a scene that's going to be used, as a major part of the rest of the scene,
Yeah.
and if you like, I was just watching, a TV show and there was, like, a bowling ball that was involved, and, my wife saw it before, I didn't see it, so it's one of those things where not having seen it, I don't think it changed anything. I knew kind of where the story was gonna go, or that scene was gonna go, but having put it in there, would have if I had seen it earlier, it would have for sure, like, been like, "Oh, I think I know what that bowling ball is gonna be used for," right?
Yeah.
Um, in comic books, so here's the thing, in TV shows, I don't you do wanna plant stuff like that earlier on,
Mhm.
but it's a little bit of a different, interaction you have with your audience because you're giving them a lot more information, right? TV and
Yeah.
movies and stuff like that. There's so many more things. The only sense that you're really not getting is the sense of smell, right? So
Yeah.
even then, sometimes they kind of give it to you in describing something, so it'll enact your sense of smell. But when it comes to like something that's written down and drawn, that's it's a step removed, right? So now you have to it's a balance of giving your audience a little bit more because if you don't give them those things, it's a little bit more jarring if all of a sudden something just shows up. They're like, "Where did that come from?" Right? That's a surprise to me. It
Doesn't
makes
make
sense,
sense. Yeah.
right? So yeah, there's a little bit of I always when it comes to staging things that are important, if you're going to use like that bowling ball as a major plot point, um, I always want to make sure it's in there earlier, just because otherwise it's like, where did that come from? Right?